Hello, welcome to another episode of the Creating Belonging podcast. Today I have with me Jim Conti. We actually, what's hilarious is Jim, I was introduced to by one of our season one guests, LD. I think you guys went to college together, right?
I think that's right. Yeah, the original connection there. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And so Jim and I have connected since. And funny enough, we actually live like a block or two from
Yeah,
each other
like
in the
almost across
neighborhood.
the street. Yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
funny and small world moment for sure.
Yeah. But connected by someone who lives in LA.
Yeah.
I love that. So Jim, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our listeners.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. To everyone listening, my name is Jim Conti. In the professional world, I currently serve as the talent partner at Hyde Park Venture Partners, which is an early stage venture capital firm headquartered in Chicago. My role, I do HR consulting across the portfolio. So come from a HR operator seat, used to run HR at software companies here in Chicago. And now I get to advise companies on that practice, which is a lot of fun. Been doing this for a little over 2 years now. And on the personal side, as Justin mentioned, live in the Chicago ecosystem, but specifically in the Andersonville neighborhood. I've been here since 2007, and so very much consider myself a Chicagoan at this point. But loving life in the city, and love to get out and explore the various neighborhoods we have here. So it's a great spot.
Thank you. You know what's funny? I've been in Chicago since 2006. And so like we've been in Chicago the same time frame. We live, a block from each other.
Seriously.
It took a mutual connection in LA to introduce us, which is
And
hilarious.
yet here we are. And yet here we are chatting on a podcast. I love it. I love it.
I think our listeners are typically used to kind of disclosing of identities up front. So just before we get started, you introduce yourself a little bit, but if there are any other identities that you wouldn't mind sharing with us today.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think it's so interesting to talk about identities because you can almost pick it apart from any different lens or perspective. But some of the like kind of bigger buckets that I'd say that very much kind of make up how I view my seat in the world or my perspective in the world. One, I'm a gay man, cis gay man, and so that is very much something that I identify with from a community perspective, and very much a part of my life today. And so that's definitely a big part of it. I also identify as both a plant dad and a dog dad. And so I got 2 dogs, golden retriever and a yellow lab, and a few more plants that I'm proud to admit. But across both of them, they are the things that help me slow down in this world. I live at a pretty fast pace. So my plants and my pups, they help me just kind of take a step back and take a deep breath. So I appreciate that. I mentioned before that I moved to Chicago in 2007 and been here since. So while I do identify as a Chicagoan, I grew up in New Hampshire, and I think that that's a pretty special place to grow up. It's not a big state. There's not a lot of us there. But it's a place that I think really formed a lot of who I am today and the community that I was a part of there as well. I went to college in Boston. I went to Boston College, which is interesting because it's a Catholic university, but I'm not Catholic myself. But the way that played out and kind of my lived experience at the university was very much a focus on volunteership and service to others, and really thinking about how we were charting a course that did well by others in the path that we took after university. And so while the Catholicism piece is not a part that I identify with, that service to others element, that volunteerism, that giving back to community is something that was deeply entrenched in me at that time. And I would say is a big kind of hallmark of how I interact with the world today. And then I think the final one that I'll put on there is that I'm a traveler. I love to go explore new places. I mentioned about exploring neighborhoods in Chicago, but like, give me a plane ticket, put me on a plane, let me go explore some neighborhood somewhere else in the world. Whenever I travel, I rarely buy tickets for things. I mostly just like leave my Airbnb or hotel and just wander for the day. Love to just see where the steps take me. And so just love to explore, travel, experience new things. And so very much an openness to that as well. So I feel like that's a big part of who I am too.
Yeah, I love that. 2 things I want to pick out there. Number one is identity by kind of geographic region that you grew up in. I think some people anchor in that, like maybe if you've moved away from that. And I guess I talk about it a lot, but I don't think of it as much as an identity. Like growing up in rural Iowa very much shaped how I see the world. Although, I'm a Chicagoan at this point,
Yeah, right. Exactly. I think, we as humans love to find shortcuts, right? Like we as humans love to find these like, cool, this means that. And then I, kind of figure something out. And so for me, at least a little bit to clarify, like I grew up in New Hampshire. My dad still lives in the same house they came home from the hospital to when I was born. And I realized that that is something that's pretty unique in the world these days. So like when I go home for the holidays, like I actually am still going to my childhood bedroom, which is kind of weird.
Mhm.
But I think that like, being able to kind of say like I grew up in New Hampshire, it's part of New England, my dad's still there. There's elements of value, there's elements of how you communicate or interact with the world. There's ways that just political perspectives or whatever that it can kind of communicate or encapsulate a little bit. And so
Mhm.
I like to kind of communicate that balance of like grew up in New Hampshire, but now in Chicago. So like small town, rural, big city, just the balance between those things. And so I think sometimes like I try and help people just kind of understand more about me of just like New Englander and a Chicagoan and a plant dad, right? And just get those kind of different perspectives and give people some of those easier shortcuts to understand who I am.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. And the second one is the having attended a Catholic university. So I don't think about it often, but I went to DePaul here in
Mm-hmm,
Chicago,
mm-hmm,
Catholic, and that was very much a part of the university mission was, service to others.
mm-hmm,
That I wasn't raised Catholic, and I'm not Catholic today, but I love that about my experience was
mm-hmm.
that the service aspect of education.
Yep, yep, very much so. And I think that it's interesting because when I think about the path that I'm on in life, I don't think I would be on this call with you today had I not attended a Catholic university, which is kind of a really funny thing to say. But
Yeah.
the thing that brought me to Chicago was a post-grad service program that I've learned about while at BC. And the openness to doing a post-grad service program as opposed to going directly into a job was never something I thought about before being exposed to it at university, right? So it's kind of a funny thing to kind of note that like the Catholic nature of the university I went to put me on a path that got me to Chicago and got me on the path of things, decisions that I've made across time to be able to get here. And so while it's a part of my background that I don't identify with, there's right the Catholicism piece specifically, that what that meant at the place that I was at put me on a path to get me where I am today, which is still just it's kind of wild to map that back a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. I sometimes reflect on those things of like that one little thing, that pivotal thing that like landed where I am today, right?
Mm-hmm,
All
mm-hmm,
these small decisions
mm-hmm.
makes me think of the movie Sliding Doors.
Yeah, I haven't heard that reference in a while, Justin. That's showing our age.
I love it. Okay, so um we could probably keep going in this vein for a while,
Oh
but
yeah.
let's dig into some of the work of creating belonging. So before we started today, we were talking a little bit about some of your experiences and kind of relating your experiences to the overbearing part of the creating belonging model. And so, just as a refresher, this is when we are high on authenticity, low on acceptance. And so, oftentimes, we've got blinders on. We're just assuming that the rest of the world sees the world the way that we do. And we're there quite often. I know that I am there quite often. And we've got to take some time to pull back those blinders and understand that not everyone sees the world the way that we do, shift into more of that acceptance. But I would love to hear some of your experiences of being in that place of overbearing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and even a half step back here, Justin, I think what's interesting about our conversation about the framework initially is that like, and like disagree with me if you want, but I feel like the overbearing category is almost the one that folks are most nervous about, right? Like it's the one that, at least when I was reading the descriptions when we were talking about the framework initially, it was the one that I was like, oh, I don't want to be in that category. Like that's not where I want to be, right? It's the one that feels like you're true to self, but not to others. And that feels, I don't know. I'm a big empath. And so I was pretty nervous about it. But when we were chatting about it, I also think that when I think of moments when when I identify as being overbearing, are also largely the moments where I feel like I've learned the most, that I've been able to take a step back and actually course correct in a way that has been, I think, impactful to both myself and to others too. So as we were chatting about it, I was willing to embrace the overbearing and a little bit of like, well, okay, here's some stories. But just to say, like, I also reflect that I think these are some of the moments that I've learned the most about myself and about others and that kind of piece there. So,
Mhm.
so as we were chatting about, one of the stories that kind of triggered for me from my personal life was a relationship with a good friend of mine. So this is a friend that I met while I was at school, actually, going back to university here. And so the two of us have some shared parts of our identity. We both identify within the LGBT community. Both have a kind of adhere to that service element that I was talking about at the university. We actually met at a service club. And so we have these elements that kind of drew us together and helped form a relationship. At the same time, we have parts of our identities that are different. So I spoke earlier a little bit about my identity, but I don't think I shared this specific point, but I'm a white cis male. And so the world that I live in is a world that largely looks like me, especially here in the US. And the friend that I'm referencing, she's a Latina female. And so someone that grew up in a household where it was just her mom. Her mom had moved to the US before she was born, but like within her own adulthood. And so had a lot of kind of migrant mentality in the home and stuff like that. And so after college, moved to Chicago. Both of us moved to Chicago independently for work and stuff and maintained our friendship. And while here, kind of rekindled a friendship and really got very, very close. And so I just kind of marched through friendship as I marched through all of my friendships, which was making plans and communicating a lot. And it's just, as an extrovert, that's who I am in the world. And so you're just going to hear from me probably more than you want to. And there was a moment, this is probably about 6 years after we graduated. So we've been in Chicago for about that period of time together. And we had made plans to hang out, and she came over and we were going to go out to dinner. And she was like, "Hey, before we go out to dinner, can we talk for a minute?" And I was like, "Sure." And we sat down, and basically she was like, "This is too much. You're too much." And I was like, "Okay, that's offensive. Like, what do you mean I'm too much?" And of course that reaction like just proves the point. Like, let's be honest. And the way the conversation went was really helpful for me, because what she was communicating was that the way that she navigated the world was different than the way that I did. That she was more of an introvert, so she tended to like more alone time. She was fairly private. She didn't like digital communication. So when I would text questions, it was not her preference to like text a response back. She was like, "Let's just like meet and like hang out a little bit." But at the same time, I'm pretty high energy. And so when we would hang out, she was just like, "It's just a lot. And if we hang out too often, it's too much." And my first reaction was I was hurt. My first reaction is that I was, this was someone I consider one of my best friends. And all of a sudden I'm being told that I'm not a good friend, or that's how I heard it. At least I was not being a good friend. And my first reaction was like, screw it. Like, if this is how you think about me, this is who I am, like, I'm out. And fortunately, that is not how the conversation went. And my brain had a second thought. But really the core of what I feel like I walked away from in that situation is that a relationship is made by the two or more people, but we'll say two in this place. Two people that are there, and it's about those two people finding their equal is the wrong word, their shared contributions to the relationship, and that those need to match in some capacity. That the energy I was putting in was too much, and it was overshadowing the energy she was able to or willing to put into our relationship, right? And so what it did was it kind of reset us back to saying, great, how do we put in energy levels that feel similar and are a little bit more matched and are a little bit more at the right balance with each other? And so some of the ways that actually kind of played out is that, like, one, as we planned times to hang out, what we would do is kind of like at the end of one of our hangouts, we would plan what our next hangout would be, but we would choose it at a cadence that kind of worked for her. So sometimes we'd go for like 2 months without hanging out one-on-one because like there were other things that she had going on, or she had travel coming up, or, just a moment in life where she's feeling a little overwhelmed and needed to take a step back. And so what was really cool about the solution we arrived at was that my extrovert, high energy self was satiated because I knew when the next plan was. I knew that, I had the security of knowing that the friendship was still there and we had, kind of the next time to see each other. But she had that space she needed, the little bit of breathing room that she needed for the high energy that I could bring to a relationship. And so, it was a really interesting, as we were talking about the framework here, one of the stories that I thought of, because again, like I said, it was a moment where I really felt like I was being called out for being a bad friend. And what she was very quick to clarify is like, this isn't about a good friend or a bad friend. This is about the two of us finding a friendship that actually works for us, that is actually the balance of the two of us and not just one person's preference over and over and over again. And so it's a mantra lesson, some phrase like that, somewhere like that I try and bring into a lot of my relationships now, try and understand, like, how much do you want? Like, what does that look like for us to develop a closeness or a friendship? And how do we maintain that? And taking a bit of a step back to recognize that the way I prefer to do it, which is like, great, let's hang out all the time, is not how actually a lot of people want to do it. But that was for me a big moment to kind of take a step back and recognize that, like, friendships are not just about getting along or hanging out. It's about finding alignment as you continue to evolve together. And so that was one of the stories that I think triggered for me when I was thinking about overbearing.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Uh, so I'm just thinking about, you mentioned a little bit of kind of how that's impacted your future relationships, is thinking about how you're creating that balance so that both people are kind of respected in the relationship. I want to dig into that a little bit more in that journey
Mhm.
of learning. And how did you start to apply that in other relationships?
Yeah. Well, in a not very honest way, like it came out at work quite a bit, right? Because working in HR, we're dealing with people every single day, day in and day out. And so I would never know what the next thing would be that was going to walk in my office. And so whether intentionally or unintentionally, we're setting up well for one of the other stories that we chatted a little bit about, which was from a professional setting. And so this was after this conversation had happened. It was when I was at a tech company here in Chicago running HR, and we had a relatively young employee population. And so I had an employee come in who was our first employee who had a kiddo while on staff with us. So we had people that we'd hired who had kids, but this is the first person that actually like took advantage of our parental leave policy, like actually went on leave and came back and was going through the transition of going from non-parent to parent actually on staff. And so she dropped a calendar invite on my calendar and came in and closed my office door and was just like clearly frustrated. Like just you could just feel the prickle coming off of her. And I was like, oh gosh, like, okay, what's going on? What's happening? And she sat down and kind of walked me through this story where the day before her manager had scheduled a meeting at like 5:30 p.m. And she had rearranged childcare so that she could stay for the meeting. You know, her partner was picking up the kiddo at daycare instead of it was her day to do it, and some other kind of logistics like that. And then she proceeded to share with me that in the meeting itself, there was about 10 or 15 minutes at the start of the meeting, which was just kind of like people were showing up late. They were getting a snack. There was just like some social banter. And then the meeting started, and then it ended later than the scheduled time. And she was furious. And so going back to the conversation we were just having about that friendship, right? Where I had this moment where I was given the opportunity to recognize that the way that I approach the world, the way that I build relationships, the way that I operate is not the way that everyone does. And we need to find the balance in there.
Hmm.
Kind of pulled from that memory, right? I was like, okay, like I usually stay till like 6. Like, what's going on here? Like, where are we going? And she walked me through the impact that it had on her, right? Like her partner had to leave early from work. It was a late in the day addition to the calendar, and so he wasn't able to get to the daycare on time. So they got charged a late fee. The meeting ended late, which meant that she got home after dinner, which was kind of the family's time to get together every day, and was just there for bedtime. And again, this was probably about 3 or 4 months after coming back from leave. So the kiddo was still super young, right? And so kind of walking through this, I was like, it was just a real eye-opening moment as to like the experience of parents in the workplace. She was one of the first parents that I had worked with, and I did not have kids myself. And so I was able to be in that conversation and be able to really appreciate the kind of the world that she was opening up to my eyes, like the reality that I didn't quite understand kind of thing. And so as you're asking about how it impacted other places, I was able to be a really safe space for her to come with a really frustrating thing and be able to strategize with her about how to better approach her manager about kind of policy and procedure around meeting scheduling, agenda setting, respective time when in a meeting, and also for her to be able to put the boundaries on her day so that she was able to do drop off and pick up accordingly. And she's still at that organization as one of the highest performers on that team. She's still on the same team that she was on. So like it worked, but it definitely took that ability to take a step back and just be able to listen to someone and help them create the conditions of success for themselves. And that like my role there was just kind of like sending some emails, clarifying some policies, and then but creating the space for it to happen kind of thing. And I really look at my friend as someone that really helped me understand that ability to really kind of like take the step back and see what someone else needs and recognize what you can give to help that person realize what it is that they need.
Yeah. I love this idea that learning happens in overbearing, but I want to reframe it a little bit,
Please do.
because I think learning can happen out of overbearing when we are willing to take on the perspective of others, like when we
Yes.
push into acceptance and take on that perspective. And I think that overbearing becomes a problem when we're willfully ignorant.
Yes, yes.
When
I
I
think of like
just
that split. Sorry, I think of that split second where either someone brings something to you, right? They kind of call you out on it, and
Mhm,
either it's the fight or flight response a little bit, right? It's like either you get pissed, right, and you go off the handle, or you get your brain to go to the tell me
mhm.
more side of it, right? Tell me more. Why? Tell me more, right?
Yeah.
You get that educational piece where you can really understand that impact.
Yeah, when you dig into acceptance, dig into taking on others' perspectives, that's where the learning happens.
Mm,
And so I love that conversation of kind of pulling that out of there, because you're right that overbearing, I think, for everyone, for even for me, is the scary one of, like, I think I joke about it in the book, and I know that I've joked about it not in the book, that, like, I don't share a lot of my own stories of overbearing because, like, they're not great stories.
yeah,
They
yeah,
don't look good on me, right?
yeah.
And so we want to be careful about how we do that. And I also think, I think the stories that you've shared are really great short stories of your character and kind of leaning into that learning moment. And some of them, some of our overbearing stories take even more time for the learning,
100%.
unfortunately.
Yep, yep,
Or,
yep.
kind of like that old saying of, uh, all lessons that we don't learn keep coming back until we learn them. Like, I'm screwing that up. Well, I'll edit that out probably. Moving on, I there's another topic that I want to dig into with you. And so earlier in the creating belonging work, I really wanted to make sure that I was, like, getting a wide perspectives of identities,
Mhm,
um, and also understanding that my lens as a gay man, is going to influence the work. And over the past 6 months, I've really been leaning into that because I do think that, LGBTQ folks are under attack across the US in different states in different ways. And so, this season of the podcast, we're probably going to see more of our people, LGBTQ
mhm,
people, on the podcast. Because I think it's worth leaning in there a bit. But I'd love to hear a bit about your journey, your professional journey, and balancing, your sexuality
mhm.
in, either hiding it or, being out. I'd love to hear a bit of your story.
Yeah, yeah. Oh gosh. So it really does feel like a journey. It really does feel like an evolution. So when I started my career, I mentioned earlier in the conversation here that I came to Chicago with a postgrad service program. So that program placed me as a middle school teacher here in Chicago. And so the feedback that I was given early on in that time is that you need to learn the personalities of your students before you start opening up about yourself, i.e., like don't fly the rainbow flag on day one kind of thing. And I'll be honest, I was not confident enough in myself to push back on that or to feel like that was the wrong answer. I was like, okay, great. And the school community that I taught in was a wonderful community. It was on the west side of Chicago here. It was a community that dealt with a lot of poverty, drugs, violence. So there was a lot going on in the neighborhood. And I struggled to find a moment where I felt truly comfortable to be fully expressing of who I am. And so I actually, at one point, actually went back to some of the program staff and kind of said, like, listen, like, I'm kind of struggling with this co-identity of being an educator and being gay. And like, is there anyone I can talk to about that? And the answer was no. Like, they didn't know any gay educators to like have me sit down for coffee with to like talk about that experience. And I
Mhm.
think for me, that was almost the thing that was like more flummoxing. I was like, you don't know any gay educators? Like, there's not a single one you can like connect me with. And they're like, not in our network. And so like, it really took me finding some people in my own circle to kind of build some of those connections. But um, coming out of the classroom setting, which is a little bit of a different setting than other kind of corporate settings that I've been in since then, just to kind of flag that. But in the steps that I took from there, every single job switch that I had, I was more and more open about my identity. And so, and that looked different ways. So the next switch that I made was that I didn't hide it. Like if someone asked, I would tell them. And then the next job after that, I would tell people it was like part of my intro or like make sure that it was part of like, my first conversation with people or something like that. All the way up until today, the relationship I find myself in today is not your standard typical relationship. So even in the vein of, I've become much more comfortable in my gay identity, particularly in a corporate and work setting, and knowing how I talk about that and my language around that, and also like my bullshit meter too. Apologies for the language here, but like, what I'm willing to accept or not accept in a work setting in that vein. On my relationship side, because it's an atypical relationship, I still find myself trying to understand and navigate a little bit that there's still this part of my identity that like I'm evolving how it comes into the workplace. And so in that vein, it's been at first at one job, I didn't talk about that part of my life. I just, I was open about my queerness, but I was not open about my relationship status. And then the next one, I was open about relationship status, but they were kind of kept far apart. Now I'm at a point where it's very integrated into my day-to-day with my coworkers, but my job is a very externally facing job. So I don't bring it up in those types of conversations very often, but with my peers here internally, I will. And so I don't know what that means in terms of like, if we were to do an update, if I do a job change at some point, what my next evolution is going to be. But it's interesting because I do look at kind of job changes as this like milestone as to like either my comfort with, my openness about, my language for my identity as it kind of continues to come into the world. The last thing I'll kind of flag here is that, it's the world continues to change. And so I agree with your point that you made about the guest that you're having on the podcast this season of having some LGBTQ voices being present and vocal is really important at this moment in time. At the same time, living in the city of Chicago, it's a relatively progressive city. And so I've also had the privilege of working in like relatively progressive environments. And so it's also been interesting to feel more and more comfortable and more as though, what's the right word here? That people want to know but don't care as much as they did before. It used to be a salacious thing, right? That you had a gay coworker, and now it's kind of like it's not in the same way as it once
Yeah.
was. For those of us that are of a certain generation that like, and I think that you and I identify a little bit in this way, but just like of a certain generation when that was a really weird thing, and now it's like almost table stakes. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you have a reaction there?
Yeah. No, I think there's you're making me think of the privilege, the luxury of living in Chicago and
Mhm.
some of that automatic acceptance because so in my journey before I moved to Chicago, I was working in an office in Des Moines, Iowa, and I was actually with the company that I moved to Chicago with. I moved
Oh,
to Chicago with the promotion, but
nice.
I was at a smaller branch in Des Moines, and I remember, if we look at the makeup of the office at that point in time, there was a woman that I worked with who, middle-aged woman who, living in Des Moines, Iowa. And I remember kind of being out in the office there,
Mhm.
and she would say, I don't know that she ever said it to my face, but she told other people in the office, she's like, Justin's too normal to be gay. Like he's just in a phase and he's gonna meet a nice woman and settle down because he's she saw me as too quote normal
Yeah.
to be, and I'm like, well, wait, what do you think a gay person is then?
Yes.
A-
Yes.
And and then I moved to Chicago and I was working in, a large bank in the corporate headquarters learning
Yeah.
and development department. Like half my team was gay.
Yeah.
And so it was just a
I
total paradigm shift in like, oh yeah, we're all gay here. Like you're cool. Welcome to the
uh-huh.
family.
Uh-huh.
Um
Uh-huh.
so there is that the community that you're in, or the geography that you're in can really
Yeah.
influence that acceptance.
Yeah. What's fascinating, Justin, is we've had a bit of a theme around overbearing as a concept here on the podcast, the episode. You were in her overbearing moment, right? You were the recipient of the overbearing
Yeah,
there, right?
yeah, absolutely. That's
Right?
a great. I don't know that I've told that story yet. So flag that story. There's
Yeah.
another story for my
Everyone, there's a
for
bonus episode coming soon. Get ready. Get ready.
the blog. I know. And it's funny because I still adore her. Like I thought she was great. So I don't mean ill of, for her in telling that story, but it's just, it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
One other thing that I wanted to grab is something I was thinking about, like, as an educator, so earlier in your career, kind of like, hey, we don't really share much about ourselves
Mhm.
with our students because, we kind of need to be this like agnostic almost figure. And it
Mhm.
actually made me think of Andrew Huberman. And if you listen to Andrew Huberman, he's
Mhm.
like, I don't know, what, number two podcast in the world.
Mhm.
Um, I listen to him regularly. But he talked like you'll always see him in his podcast, and he's like in a black button-down shirt, like full sleeves. And he's admitted before on, I don't know, in some podcasts, maybe his own, like he's covered in tattoos.
Yeah.
And like, talks about how he puts on this persona in his professional life as a professor and in his podcasting world of
Mhm.
this very like apolitical, agnostic kind of person who is just there to state the facts.
Yeah.
And so that's where I'm at. I'm just thinking about where are those places in life where we have to be kind of generic? And is that okay?
Ooh, that's a great question. Well, I mean, that's a great question. Justin, I think my first response comes back to safety. I think that for anyone who has some form of an othered identity, that's often one of the first places that we think of, right? Like, is this a safe space for me to be who I am? And I
Mhm.
think within that we have to acknowledge privilege, right? Like I think of my peers who are people of color who cannot hide their skin color or hair color or texture or whatever in any given context, right? My gayness, our gayness, we can choose to cover if we want to, right? So we do actually get to choose, like walking through a doorway, who we are in that instance based on that quick read across the room, right? So I think of that first, but then I also think very quickly of I have the number of rooms that I have been in where I am the only queer person in that room, or at least the only one that's open about it and clarified that and made it known to others, right? We know that there's a lot of folks that for many different reasons don't feel comfortable or aren't capable of being able to have that openness. Um, and so I have in those instances tried very hard to be as much as I can the champion for those causes, right? So I think of past leadership teams that I've been a part of. I think of panels that I sit on. I think of, being a guest on a podcast within a season, right? Like, are there a variety of voices that are coming to the table? At the same time, it's really interesting. There's an organization here in Chicago, or it's a national organization, but the CEO is here in Chicago called Start Out. It's an organization that supports LGBT entrepreneurs. They do really fantastic programming, great work, awesome stuff. I've had the great privilege of getting to know them over the last kind of year in my role and participate in a couple of the programs. What's really interesting is that like when I even reflect on my own understanding of like my gayness in a room or my own understanding of my identity, I go to a start out event and I'm probably one of the least adept people in that room to be able to articulate my identity. And yet, in most settings in my life, I'm the most articulate in being able to identify or be able to talk about my identity because I am the only one. And so I think about it also of just like the context and community you're part of. Also, like I think I'm the same person, but like when in a room of all LGBT people who are able to really be able to talk really really eloquently about how they identify, how that impacts their lived experience, I find myself humbled in those settings. Yet I find
Mhm.
myself in settings where I have to do that type of talk because there's no one else to do it. It's an interesting balance because I'm the same person in both, but not at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a bit of context of how do I fit into this group? And when you're I mean, it's kind of like, if we take the gay identity out of it, like, if you were um talking about neurobiology to a bunch of people who were accountants,
Mhm.
you could be like really confident about it, right? But if you were trying to talk about neurobiology in front of a room of other neurobiologists, you'd be like, ooh, gosh, they all know more than I do. And so
Mhm.
there's that positionality of does my experience mean more, or do I have more than
Mhm.
everyone else? And so it becomes kind of this intimidating thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And what's
that's what
so interesting is that like there are skills you can have, right? In which case you have more skill or less skill or more knowledge or less knowledge on a thing. But when it comes to identity, it's like it's not it's not a game. It's not a point system in which you have 80 identity points because you've whatever, right? It's like we all have our identity and it is what it is. But I totally agree with what you just said. I step into a room of all queer folks, and it's often a bit intimidating because I'm rarely in a setting like that. I'm rarely in community with people that share that part of my identity with me in that same way. I often find myself having to be the one, right? Yeah, that's whew. I'm gonna think about that for a few minutes.
Yeah, that's a good one to dig into. And it's interesting. Uh, I'm definitely a little teaser for some of the work that I'm doing. I'm I've been digging deep into authenticity and where authenticity lives in our brains, and like how authenticity and identity are formed.
Mhm.
Uh, and spoiler, authenticity is a combination of who we are, but also who we think everyone wants us to be. And
Mm.
so there's an interesting mix there. And so I'm playing there. I haven't solved it all, but that's all work for the second edition.
Ooh,
um
that's a big one, huh?
yeah.
Yeah.
Jim, I have really enjoyed our conversation today, and we'll have to go have drinks in the neighborhood soon, beings we're literally a
Twist
block
my
away.
arm. Twist my arm.
But thank you so much for joining us. And if anyone wants to get in contact with you, how do they do that?
Yeah. So LinkedIn is easy. Just search my name. I usually pop up pretty quickly. If that's a little challenging, the firm I work for, Hyde Park Venture Partners, you can find our website. I have a profile on there and links to email and stuff like that. Feel free to reach out. If any of the topics that we chatted about today resonate and folks want to go a little deeper, I would love to connect further. But also, if folks just want to talk more about identity in the workplace, identity in life, how we figure stuff out, how we build relationships with others, I'm all ears. Let's chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. And thank you all for listening, and join us again for another episode soon.